Okay, so just to make sure that everybody can hear me okay, could you use the chat box at the bottom of your screen just to let me know where everybody is from? Brilliant. So Marta from Portugal, Jesus from Colombia, Thales from Brazil, Iran, Los Angeles, Argentina. Wow, everybody, everywhere. Kazakhstan, some really kind of great places. Philippines, London, Nigeria. Excellent. This is brilliant. It's really great to see everybody. Real sort of international listenership today. Okay. So, welcome to this edition of Hult's Thought Leadership webinar series, where we explore the hottest topics affecting society and business today. For those who are joining a Hult event for the first time, just a bit of background about us. Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills, challenging you with a future-oriented curriculum and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer an undergraduate program, 5 specialist one-year master's programs, a 1-year global MBA, and a uniquely flexible part-time executive MBA. More information on our programs and upcoming scholarship deadlines can be found at www.hult.edu. This morning, we're joined by Hult Professor Roger Delves to explore one of this year's hottest topics, integrity and authenticity in leaders. Now, before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. The webinar will last around an hour in total, and we will have time for questions at the end. A recording of the webinar will also be sent out to everyone after the event, so whether you missed the end or missed the start or want to watch it again, you will receive it in an email. If not tomorrow, it'll be Friday. If you wish to ask a question, please write it in the Q&A box at the bottom. You should be able to see it. Sometimes it's in the bar at the top or the bottom, but there is a Q&A box, and at the end we will get to it and we can ask Roger all your questions. Now, I also wanted to say that we might have, if we have any webinar Wi-Fi sort of issues, I will restart it and come straight back here, use the exact same link you used. Hopefully you were fine this morning, so I hope we don't have any issues, but if we do, that will be the plan. Okay, so let me hand over to Roger.
Thank you, Lizanne, and hello and welcome to all of you from all over the world. And welcome to this webinar on inspiring leadership. So I am Roger Delves. I'm a professor of practice. My practice area is leadership and my special interest is in authenticity. I am the head of qualifications at Ashridge. Ashridge is the executive education arm of Hult. Ashridge is a UK business school which merged with Hult in 2015. I've been working with Hult and with Ashridge for the last 10 years. I teach on Hult undergraduate and postgraduate programs, as well as across Ashridge master's programs as well. And what I'm going to do this evening is take you through some of my thoughts and ideas around approaches to authenticity and decision making, and how that might lead to inspiring leadership. Now, in the course of the webinar, I'm going to be asking some questions and getting you to put your thoughts into the chat box that Lizanne was just talking about. And then when we get to the end of the webinar, we'll pick some of the juicier comments from the chat box and pick those up as part of the Q&A. So please don't hold back. When I ask you to contribute into the chat box, the more the merrier, and on we go. Okay, so we need leaders to inspire us in challenging times. Now, I don't think anybody could deny that these are challenging times, whether you pick up the business pages, whether you pick up the news pages, whether you're looking at international politics or international business, whether you're looking locally or globally, all we see around us are challenges. And these challenges have led to an expression which is now in common coinage about us having to operate in a VUCA environment, VUCA, V-U-C-A, an environment which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Now, it's bad enough trying to be a team member in a VUCA environment, but for a leader to lead in a VUCA environment, one of the first things that one realizes is one doesn't have the answers. it's reasonably easy to lead on a bright, sunny day when you can see where you've been, you can see where you're going, when you've got a map and a compass to guide you. Most people can lead in those environments. But the VUCA environment isn't like that. In the VUCA environment, the cloud is down. It's foggy. It's raining. Somebody's dropped the compass and somebody else has trodden on it and broken it. The map is soggy and impossible to read in the wet. And yet still, these people need leading. And because it's clear that nobody knows the answers, what leaders need to do is inspire people, to encourage them to keep going. So how do we as leaders inspire others in challenging times? That's what I want to look at with you over this next hour or so. So the first question is, what is inspiring? Now, I'm going to talk about a 3-point approach to being inspiring. Now, inspiration isn't something that you can boil down to an ABC, but this is a way simply of guiding us through what we're going to talk about. If you want to be an inspiring leader, it's important that you make decisions which are congruent with some kind of an authentic framework. One of the things which followers find deeply disturbing is this sense that there is no rhyme or reason to the decision-making of the leader. That all the leader is doing is responding to the situation as it arises. So it's a very contingent style of leadership. And as each new situation arises, the leader desperately tries to respond to it. And this contingent leadership is very unsettling and not sustainable. Far better is this congruent style of leadership where we know the framework of authenticity within which the leader will make decisions. And that, for those of us who are following, gives us something to hold on to, something that reassures us. We might not know exactly what decision the leader will make, but we know that the decision will be bound by this authentic framework. And that gives us confidence. And it causes us to trust. Now, trust is one of these things that we're going to bump into quite a lot as we walk through this evening's webinar. I say this evening because it's evening where I am. It may well not be where you are. Trust is a strange thing. We trust people when it looks like they know what they're doing, when they have some kind of credibility in our eyes because they know the job. We trust people when they're reliable, when they actually do what they say they're going to do. And we trust people when they're emotionally available to us, when they are there to talk to, there to ask questions of, there to listen to us, when they don't hide themselves away from us. So if you're credible, reliable, and emotionally available, you will be trusted. But the thing that undermines trust, and you see this on the world stage in politics at the moment very frequently, what undermines trust is the sense that the individual we are following is making decisions based not on the best interests of the organization or the team, but on their own best interests. They are fundamentally self-interested, selfish. Now, we don't want to follow people who are selfish. We don't trust them. Our trust is undermined by this realization that they are being selfish. We want to follow leaders who are selfless, who are not self-regarding, but other-regarding. And this sense of selflessness is an absolutely critical element of an authentic framework. Now, you can pick up the newspapers, the business papers, the politics papers, and you can look at Elon Musk, you can look at Donald Trump, you can look at the lawyers in America who are under indictment, and you can look at any number of people where we have lost our trust in them because it would appear that everything they do out of self-interest. So that's an important part of understanding this authentic framework. Leaders have to make decisions from within this authentic framework, and they keep our trust when part of this authentic framework is this sense of selflessness. Leaders also need to behave with integrity. Now, a little later on, I'm going to work through a definition of integrity that Daniel Goleman uses, which is very helpful because it helps us to understand why we have challenges with integrity. Integrity is one of these concepts where many of us approve of integrity and of behaving with integrity, but we find it more difficult to do than we do find it to approve of. So as a leader, if you can behave with integrity, that can be inspirational for other people, because we somehow feel that that's been lacking from the leadership stage for some while now. And finally, the third inspiring thing is to follow leaders who have ready access to strongly held values. Leaders who believe in something, and leaders who are clear about what it is that they believe in. Leaders who are prepared to share those values and to say proudly, this is what I believe in. And what I believe in actually colours my decision-making. So these three aspects are, in my view, together a very powerful route to inspiring leadership. We're going to look at each of them in turn. So leaders think, they consider, and then they make decisions. How they think, what they choose to look at, what they choose to disregard, how much weight they choose to give one thing rather than another. What criteria they use in making decisions will inform every aspect of the organization's success or otherwise. And in the end, the degree to which leaders are successful or not is directly related to the quality of the decisions they make, and remembered best for that one bad decision they made. In the UK, Tony Blair was a very successful prime minister, but he is remembered more than anything else for his mistakes and his errors of judgment around Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction. David Cameron was a successful prime minister, but he is remembered for his disastrous decision to hold a referendum on Britain leaving the EU. And in your own countries, you will be able to think about politicians in particular, who, even when they have many a triumph in their career, are remembered more than anything else for that one fatally bad decision that they made. So I think one of the things that's very important is, what do we carry into that decision-making process? And when I think about how I want to be led, I think I want to be led by somebody who makes decisions with their conscious mind. And you might think, well, of course, I mean, how else can one make decisions? But in truth, many of us carry into our decision-making baggage from our unconscious mind. Now, what we carry, a term coined for this by Alistair MacIntyre, a moral and political philosopher, is moral particularity. And this is a quote from Alistair writing about moral particularity. He says, "I am someone's son or daughter, someone else's cousin or uncle. I am a citizen of this or that city, a member of this or that guild or profession. I belong to this tribe, that clan, this nation. I inherit from my family, my city, my tribe, my nation, a variety of debts, inheritances, rightful expectations, and obligations. These constitute the given of my life, my moral starting point. This is in part what gives my life its own moral particularity." Now, at the start of this webinar, Lisanne asked where people were from, and we heard a roll call of different places around the world, different countries in the globe. And each of you living in those different countries, being brought up in those different countries, in those different cultures, being brought up in different faiths or without a faith, being brought up in different types of schools, being educated at home, being brought up in big families or little families. All of these things together give you your own moral particularity. And until and unless you examine what you carry with regard to moral particularity, you don't know the extent to which it's influencing your decision-making, the extent to which your tribe, your clan, your nation, your family, the expectations people put on you, the obligations people put on you are actually unconsciously affecting your decision-making. Because all of these things constitute your moral particularity. Now, as a leader, particularly if you want to be an inspiring leader, you can't have this grey area where you don't know whether or not you are being influenced unduly by your unconscious. So one of the first things I say to leaders or people who want to be leaders is you need to be self-aware. You need to unpack and examine the baggage you carry, both the conscious baggage and the unconscious baggage. And you need to ask yourself, is this baggage really required on the journey? Or am I carrying lots of things which I really don't need to be carrying anymore? Am I carrying lots of things which might unconsciously influence me when I don't want to be unconsciously influenced? Be careful that your moral particularity is not influencing your decision-making, because if it is, then your ability to be an inspiring leader will be inhibited. So the first thing that I'd like to think about and maybe make a contribution into those chat boxes about is whether you can think of any examples from your own experience where an individual's moral particularity coloured their decision-making. Now, that individual could be you, or it could be somebody you know, somebody you worked with, somebody you had experience of. But I'm interested to hear how you have experienced your own or somebody else's moral particularity and how that has coloured decision-making. So if you've got some examples or an example, just tap it into the chat box, and at the end of the session, Lisanne and I will pick out one or two of them to talk about. Okay, so we've said that authenticity and decision-making are both important in inspiring leadership. So what is authenticity? Now, authenticity, and in the context of authentic leadership, is different to using the word authentic in its everyday sense. So you could go to a market stall and you could pick something up and you could say, this is authentic leather or this is authentic gold. And what you mean is this is the real thing. And this can sometimes confuse people a little bit, because people have said to me in the past, look, I'm blunt and I speak my mind and I always tell people exactly what I think, and that's me. And so that's the way I behave, and nobody's going to change that because that's the authentic me. And I say, well, yeah, you're describing who you are, but that doesn't make you authentic. It doesn't make you an authentic leader. In fact, from the way you're describing yourself, it simply makes you a rather rude individual. Authentic leadership means something very particular. And it's not about behaving in a way that reflects who you are, unless that who you are is a very particular thing, which we'll get onto in a minute. I think the first thing to say about authentic leadership is, if you are not authentic, if you are inauthentic, then it is immediately apparent. You can pretend to be a lion by painting your face, but you're still a child with a painted face. And the difference between a child with a painted face pretending to roar like a lion and the real thing is immense. The huge difference between inauthentic and authentic people is the kind of values that they hold. Inauthentic people, leaders or otherwise, tend to have values that promote self-interest in a rather exploitative way. So they're always looking out for themselves. Authentic leaders tend to have values which are about other people, about what's right for the team, what's right for the organization. Their values tend to be what's called other regarding or selfless. And you only need to be around authentic people for a very short time before you realize that they are different. Different in how they respond to situations, different in how they see things to their inauthentic cousins. For authentic leaders, thoughts are consistent with actions. Now, you might think that, isn't that obvious? Isn't it true for all of us that our thoughts are consistent with our actions? But actually, no. For lots of us, there is a big challenge. We attach more importance to what others believe than to what we know to be true. So, in fact, what we do is we value belonging over being. And therefore, we don't behave with authenticity. And we are not led by our own values. Because what we won't give up is this desire, this determination to belong to the group. And this is how bad cultures get formed. If you've ever worked in organizations where there are poor cultures, so there might be a culture of bullying or ageism or racism or sexism or faithism, or there might be a culture of misbehavior, a culture of petty theft, whatever it might be. If you want to belong in that organization, you're required to belong to that culture. So you find yourself perhaps having to laugh along to jokes that you find distasteful because everybody else laughs at them, or turn a blind eye to things that you know are wrong because everybody else is doing them. And you do it because you want to belong, because you don't want to be the odd person out. Authentic people don't do that. And it's not that they are intrinsically better than the rest of us. It is possibly that they're intrinsically braver than the rest of us, in that they will not allow their own values to be subverted or distorted by groupthink or by the desire to belong to a group. They would rather be separate and behave in a way that they know is right than belong and behave in a way that they know is wrong. Now, this is not to say that every workplace is full of this threat, but certainly one of the great challenges in a workplace is this idea of constantly behaving the way we know we want to behave, or the way that we know we ought to behave, of being the person that we really can be on a really good day, and being that person every day. The authentic leaders are guided by explicit and conscious other regarding values that emphasize the collective interests of their group or their organization. So they lead by reference to an examined, typically unchanging template, which is often a set of values. So they know how they want to behave. They want to behave in a way that reflects these values. They've thought about these values. They know that they are proud of them. They know that they believe that they are right and good values. And because they've thought about them, and because they feel ownership of them, if they are tempted to behave in a way that is opposed to those values, or if they are asked to behave in a way that is opposed to those values, then they have the strength of character and the strength of belief not to do so. Not all the time, nobody's perfect, but much more of the time. So what this is about then, if we put it another way, in the words of one of my favorite 20th century philosophers, this is Professor Albus Dumbledore, the professor in charge of the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And in the background there is Harry Potter. And Dumbledore gives Potter some advice in the very first of the Harry Potter books, The Philosopher's Stone, in which he says this. He says, "It does not matter what we intend to do. We all have good intentions. What matters is what we decide to do. It is by our actions, not our intentions, that others judge us." And I think this is hugely true. If I was judged by my intentions, I would be a wonderful person. Every morning I get up full of good intentions. And you may well have heard the expression, the old proverb that says, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." The challenge is not having good intentions. The challenge is following through and actually doing what those intentions would cause us to do. And what is it that stands in the way? Temptation. Temptation is imperative. And decisions and actions rarely seem so perverse when viewed through the lens of self-interest. I'll give you a very big picture example of what I mean. Back in 2008, there was the credit crunch, and financial institutions in many parts of Western Europe and in America were in huge financial trouble, and many failed. And at the heart of this failure was the buying and selling of things called collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs. And collateralized debt obligations were basically whole tranches of debt pushed together into one big ball and then sold as a thing of value to pension funds, to insurance companies, to investors, to brokers. And at the heart of these collateralized debt obligations were subprime mortgages, mortgages sold to people who had very little chance of paying the mortgages back. So the CDOs were of very little worth in truth, but they were being sold at vastly inflated prices by people who knew them to be of very little worth. And when the bubble all burst and there was carnage everywhere, I wondered why on earth the intelligent people had carried on doing this. And I was reading a report into the bonuses paid to these brokers who were selling these collateralized debt obligations. And the report told me that in 2007, the top 10 brokers in America selling these CDOs had each earned in bonuses in excess of $67 million. And there were over 1,000 brokers in America who'd earned over $10 million in bonuses. Now, that's temptation. The temptation to shut up about the fact that these things were truly worthless. Because if you sold enough of them, you got that very, very serious bonus. And the only thing you have to protect yourself against that sort of temptation is your values. Is not intending to do the right thing, but actually deciding to do the right thing. Now, temptation can take many forms. It very rarely takes the form of a $67 million bonus. It might take the form of a bigger company car, or a promotion, or a move to another office, or the corner office, a bigger desk. It might take any number of forms. But if we do what we do, if we make the decisions that we make based on personal gain, then probably temptation is driving our actions rather than authentic decision-making. Temptation can take many forms. Here's a quote from JeanPaul Sartre from a play he wrote called Dirty Hands in 1948. And this is words he put into the mouth of a character who is a very cynical, very powerful head of a commune running a town in Eastern Europe. And this cynical, powerful leader is talking to a young, very purist individual who is criticizing the way this older man is leading. And the older man says, "How you cling to your purity, young man. How afraid you are to soil your hands. Well, I have dirty hands, right up to the elbows. I've plunged them in filth and blood. But what do you expect? Do you think you can govern innocently?" So here's my second discussion point for you to comment on in the chat box if you would. Do we think that we can govern in the sense of lead within an organization? Do we think we can lead innocently? If we don't, how can and how should we lead? Do we have to plunge our hands up to the elbows in filth and blood? If we can govern innocently, what does that look like? And if we don't want to plunge our hands up to the elbows in filth and blood, and we don't want to govern innocently, how do we lead? I'm interested in your thoughts around that. And I have some thoughts of my own, which I'll share with you now. So a lot of what I've been saying is saying it isn't so difficult to understand how to be an inspirational leader. What's difficult is actually putting it into place. So how do we protect ourselves against temptations? Against the temptation to seek power by any means, by plunging our hands. The temptation to pursue personal gain, the bonus, the car, the holiday, the corner office. The temptation to belong rather than to be oneself. So this 3-point plan is designed to help us protect ourselves against those sorts of temptations. I'm going to tell you the 3 points and then I'm going to go into each of them one by one. So the first is behave with integrity. The second is access your values. And the third is make decisions which are congruent with an authentic framework. If you do those 3 things, you can protect yourself against temptation and lead in an inspiring way. So let's take them one by one. Integrity is another one of these ideas, that you say to people, is integrity good? And everyone goes, yeah, integrity is great. And then you say, okay, so define integrity for me. And there's a lot of shuffling and umming and ahhing and I'm not sure. It's a good thing, but I don't really know how to define it. And here's a definition that comes from Daniel Goleman, from an earlier work of his called Emotional Intelligence that he wrote back in 1998, which is around the time that some of the really important research around authenticity was taking place as well. And Goleman was writing about emotional intelligence, and he was thinking about integrity in this context. And he came up with this 3-part definition of how to behave with integrity. And I think it's rather a good one. First, he says, you have to discern right from wrong. Now, sometimes that's very easy. Sometimes it's completely obvious what is right and what is wrong. So somebody stealing is wrong. Somebody bullying is wrong. Somebody being ageist or racist or sexist or faithist is wrong. But sometimes things are very subtle. There are shades of grey. You know that what the situation as it is not right, but you don't know what to do to move it to a better solution. And on the world stage, you can look at Syria. You could look at the past in Northern Ireland. You could look at the past in Iran or Iraq, or you could look in Palestine. There are loads of places in the world you could look at and you could say, that's not good. But that's different to knowing who's right and who's wrong, or knowing how to set right what's gone wrong. So sometimes this first step in behaving with integrity is easy. And sometimes it's really difficult. And we won't always agree. And one of the things about integrity is it is not an absolute, it's a subjective thing. My integrity may be different to your integrity. And what you believe it has integrity and what I believe has integrity may be different. And we might both be right that each thing does have integrity, but we may not agree as to what is the best of the two. So discerning right from wrong may be difficult, might be straightforward. The second step in behaving with integrity is to act on what we discern. Now again, sometimes this is very easy and very straightforward, but sometimes this takes huge amounts of courage. buckets of bravery to actually act on what we've discerned and say, right, I can see what is right and what is wrong here, and I am going to act. Because that might mean not belonging. That might mean being a lone voice. That might mean whistleblowing. That might mean doing something that's deeply unpopular. But if we have discerned right from wrong and we do not act, then we have no integrity in that area, in that particular circumstance. And then finally, we have to state plainly that it is integrity which drives our actions. We have to be proud of what we do, and we have to be prepared to say, I have done this, and I have done it because I believe it has integrity. Now, sometimes other people will disagree with you and will say, I do not believe that that does have integrity. But as long as you believe it has, and as long as your position is arguable, and as long as you genuinely have discerned right from wrong in your mind, based on your values, and acted on what you've discerned fairly, and you are prepared to say quite plainly that you've done what you believe is right, then you have integrity. You may not have people's agreement, but you have integrity. I'll share an example that I use in class that might make this point. If you are traveling home late on a train, a commuter train, and there's two of you in a carriage and the other person gets up to go, and after they've got out and the train's moved off, you realise they left their wallet behind. And you pick it up and it's got their driver's license in it, it's got credit cards, it's got their business card, and it's got some money in it. It's very easy for you to return that wallet to them. You can use your smartphone to send them an email to say you found it and you'll return it. You can call their smartphone to say, look, I found your wallet, how can I get it back to you? Whatever it might be, you can. It's quite clear the right thing to do is to return that wallet. And so you act on what you've discerned, and you make contact with the individual who's lost the wallet and you return it. Straightforward. Okay. More complicated. The other person in the carriage, the last person in the carriage with you, is a hulking, great, vicious, dangerous-looking individual who scares you, frankly, and you are utterly thrilled when he gets off the train and leaves the train. And when the train has pulled out, you discover that he has dropped this big wallet of money. There's no credit cards, there's no identification, there's nothing in there whatsoever except a huge amount of money in cash. You can't return it to him because there's no identification in there. And you are absolutely convinced in your own mind that this man is a criminal and this money is the proceeds of criminal activity, probably drugs. Now, as it happens, one of your aging parents at home is going blind because they need a cataract operation, which they can't afford. And you believe that it is entirely right to take this money, which has fallen into your lap, and which is the proceeds of criminal activity, and use it to pay for that cataract operation that your parent could otherwise not have. Now, as long as you say plainly to your parent, this is how I've got this money, and I believe it's right to use it in this way. And as long as you state plainly to anybody who says, oh, wow, you managed to find the money for your parents' operation, how you found it and why you decided to do what you did with it, then you have integrity. Somebody else might say, no, you've stolen that money. And you might say, no, I don't believe I have. And you might argue about that, and you might agree and you might disagree. But what you cannot do is take the money and then pretend to your parents that you won it gambling and not tell anybody that you found it when somebody left their wallet on a train. That does not have integrity, because you are not stating plainly what you have done. You are lying about what has happened. And if you are ashamed about what you've done, then what you've done has no integrity. If you believe what you've done has integrity, you are prepared to tell people what you have done and then allow them to make their own judgments. And we will not always agree with one another about what does and does not have integrity. And many of the people listening to me today might say, well, I don't think that does have integrity. And I'm not even saying I think it has integrity. I'm saying that some individuals might say it has integrity and could argue that point. So, integrity is about making decisions using rules or guidelines in which we believe, and not deciding based simply on the situation or the circumstances. And for people who are following, that is hugely reassuring. Integrity is a tough road to walk. This is a quote from Abraham Lincoln, which I like. I'm not always bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I'm not always bound to succeed, but I am bound to live up to what I hold to be right. So be true, live up to what I hold to be right, and I will have integrity. Integrity provides predictability and consistency, because unpredictability and inconsistency is unnerving, particularly in this VUCA environment, which we already find deeply distressing as an operating space. Secondly, access values. It's inspiring for leaders to access their values, and it helps them to resist temptation. Values are lasting beliefs that some things, behaviors like honesty, generosity, helpfulness, loyalty, fidelity, compassion, or goals like developing knowledge, developing skill, developing understanding, acquiring personal comfort. Some things are more desirable than others. Values are bigger than any particular objective or situation. So if you have something as a value, you stick to it regardless of the objective or the situation, regardless of the temptation. If you have a value of helpfulness, you will be helpful regardless of how much it puts you out, regardless of how tired you are, regardless of how many times that day you've already been helpful. If you have a value of loyalty, you will be loyal regardless of the temptation to be disloyal. If you cannot hold your value regardless, then it isn't really a value. It might be a preferred behavior, but it's not a value. And I always use honesty as an example of this. I think that many of us don't really have honesty as a value. We have it as a preferred behavior. We will be honest, all things being equal, and we prefer to be honest. But if we find ourselves in a position where being honest is really a very difficult thing to be, we'll be dishonest and we'll forgive ourselves and we'll get over it. So we don't really have it as a value. People who have honesty as a value are honest regardless of the consequence, are honest however painful it might be. And that's the difference. Now, integrity is underpinned by values because, of course, values help us to discern right from wrong. So if we are going to act with integrity, then it's really important that we know what our values are. Now, this is not a complete list of values by any means. And with each of these values, I've kind of associated some behaviors with them. But some people might say, well, actually, no, one or two of these behavior words I think of as values words. That's fine. You need to decide for yourself what your own values are. And if you don't have a very clear idea of that, you're not ready to lead, because you need a really strong sense of self-awareness to lead. And absolutely central to that is knowing what your values are. Knowing what your core values are, those things that you will not give up. those things that you hold tightly, the ones which are strongly internalized, because they're the ideal basis for leadership which has integrity. Your other values, those ones which are more peripheral, which are more like preferred behaviors, will be abandoned or ignored depending on the circumstances. And they can't be relied on, so they can't support you in your striving for integrity. So, finally, make decisions which are congruent with an authentic framework. An authentic framework means a behavior or course of action decided not by situational imperatives, but by reference to this examined template, this sense of values. An authentic framework means being true to oneself with activities congruent with deeply held values. An authentic framework means a dedication to high-end, other regarding values. So that 3-point plan, behaving with integrity, understanding our values, and making decisions congruent with an authentic framework, will protect us from the temptations that undermine our leadership. Lizanne, what have we got in the chat box?
Hi, thanks so much, Roger. So we've got loads of comments, which I'll start with first. But just to let you know that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, sometimes at the top. If you could put your questions in there, and I'll pose them to Roger after we just go through the comments. So Marta said, once I was deciding where to go to work, I was living in a big city. An opportunity came in an island. Because I've been brought up in a city and in mainland, I never took that job as I didn't want to be around the water. Maybe I lost a great opportunity. Anthony said, moral particularity. My boss is never focused on doing a great job right from the very start. He always is interested in the results, outcome, and pays very less attention to the process. This makes me work twice as hard in redoing a given job if the results fall below expectations.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Lila says, I don't think it is possible to lead innocently. The only thing should, in my opinion, about that is that you should be able to adapt to any situation within the shortest time possible. Sometimes that means some very easy and innocent leading, and sometimes definitely the elbow deep in dirt method.
Yeah, so perhaps I should come clean now and say, I think for me, the answer to that question is no, you can't lead innocently, but you don't have to plunge your hands up to the elbows in filth and blood. For me, the opposite to leading innocently is not plunging your hands up to the elbows, it's leading with integrity. If you lead with integrity, you can lead through the most difficult of circumstances without having to plunge your hands up to the elbows in filth and blood. But you're not being innocent either. Somebody who leads with integrity is not an innocent. They're pragmatic, they're practical, they understand the real world. They simply respond to that real world with a degree of integrity, which means that they will not become sucked into the parts of the real world which destroy our values.
Okay, so something on a similar theme, Sajid has said, I think we can't always lead innocently, and there will be times that we have to make decisions that are not good, but the thing is we always have to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and in seeing that bigger picture and in being realistic and in understanding that, for example, sometimes people have to be made redundant, otherwise the whole company is going to go broke. We understand that. But the decision about when, who, how many, all those decisions have got to be made with integrity and selflessly. And then you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I did the very best possible job I could with the situation as I found it.
Arvi and Anthony have also something along the governing innocently. Arvi says, if we can govern innocently, we will not be influenced of the minds around us, but of our own values. And Anthony said, to govern innocently is very difficult, as in most cases, the governed believes that all leaders are elbow deep in the mud.
Yeah, and again, this is why, because people believe that you can't lead without being elbow deep in the mud, this is why leading with integrity is so inspirational, because it shows people there is another better way, that there isn't this dichotomy. You're either the innocent who always gets destroyed, or you're the pragmatist who will do anything to hold on to power and get things done. There is a way that allows you to lead successfully with integrity.
Yeah, Lucas also had something to say. He said, we could lead innocently if we were immersed in an innocent environment, as I think this doesn't exist in business, at least. We cannot be innocent. That won't allow leaders to behave incorrectly or lose their set of values, but followers will expect the leader to protect the team from being easily cheated.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. And then Veronica has said, delegating is believing that your core values will be taken in these activities. Is it correct? Should it be expected? When you trust someone, it doesn't mean that the person has the same core values that you do.
Well, I think if you trust somebody, they don't have to have the same core values that you do, but they do have to have a set of values that you can respect and that you expect them to maintain. So if I trust somebody, I can trust somebody with different values to mine, but they can't be values which are self-regarding. I would not trust somebody whose primary values were self-regarding, or whose primary values I believed to be self-regarding. But if, for example, my primary values were around compassion, loyalty, and respect, and somebody else's core values were around discipline and hard work and courage, I can respect those values and I can trust somebody, because those values are not self-serving values, they're other regarding values. So I don't have to share their values, but I do have to feel that they have got a responsible values set, which is fundamentally other regarding. That is to say, I have to believe that they're authentic if I'm going to trust them.
Yeah. So I'll go to the question box now. And a really interesting question from Marta is, how are you sure you're being successful on leading with integrity within an organization?
Well, I think partly it's about the culture that exists amongst the people you're leading. If you're successfully leading in this way that I'm describing, you should feel and you should find that the culture in the team that you're leading and the culture around you is an achievement culture. People should feel well supported, and people should feel they can take on high challenge. In lots of organizations, people feel that they have to take on high challenge, but they don't feel well supported. And that kind of culture is a very stressful culture. So you should feel the success of your leadership through the kind of culture that your leadership supports and creates.
Brilliant. And then another question is, do you think that integrity is inherent or learned?
I think it can be learned. I think that you need to understand the principles of integrity. You need to understand the importance of things like self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and you need to practice it. So it absolutely can be learned, because frankly, I don't think any of us are born with the ability to resist temptation. We have to practice it, and we need tools and techniques to help us. And integrity is a technique to help us resist temptation.
Brilliant. And then Anthony has asked, how do we handle the issue of integrity in relation to a life-threatening situation?
To a life-threatening situation?
Yes, sorry, life-threatening situation.
Well, it's difficult to know what Anthony's asking about specifically. I mean, if you think back to the definition of integrity, Anthony, if a life is at threat, then you have to decide what is right, what is right or wrong to do. If it's right to protect that life, then you then have to act as courageously as you can to do what's necessary to protect that life. It's an impossible question to give a short answer to, because it depends what the threat to life is coming from. If it's a self-imposed threat, for example, if somebody is abusing drugs and you see that as a threat to their life and you believe that you need to step in and try to prevent that, then it requires great courage and great patience and great love to do that. Because one of the things you might have to combat is somebody else's, is the other person's determination that they have the right to destroy themselves this way if that's what they choose to do. So it's kind of impossible to answer without knowing the circumstances. But my first instinct would be to say to you, take that 3-level approach of discerning right from wrong, acting on what you've discerned, and then stating openly that you're acting through your understanding of integrity, and see if you can apply that to the situation that's in your mind and see if that helps you.
Brilliant. Okay, and then for our final question from RV, can we simply define integrity of not being afraid of being you, sticking to your values, despite what others will think of you?
Certainly sticking to your values will help you to have integrity. But no, I don't think it's as simple as that, because that won't necessarily help you to discern right from wrong. And you could have a perfectly good value set that doesn't necessarily require you to act on what you've discerned if you discern something which is wrong. So where integrity is different to values is integrity requires you to act if you see something which is wrong. And your values don't necessarily require you to act in that same way. So integrity is about action and values is about attitude. And those are two slightly different things.
Brilliant. Now, I think that's time to wrap up. So I want to say thank you so much, Roger. That was brilliant. It was so insightful.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone for joining us, the questions, everything. I think it was really, really a great session. As we said before,
great questions, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. As we said before, a recording of this will also be sent out in the next couple of days. So if you want to catch up, and if you would like more information on our courses, please make sure to visit hult.edu. If you feel this was useful to you, we have a number of other thought leadership webinars coming up throughout the year. The next one will be on the 2nd of October with a very special guest who has yet to be announced, but look out for the email in the next coming weeks. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much for your presentation again, Roger, and thanks very much to everyone for joining us. Hope to see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Roger, see you. Bye-bye.